I think we're going to kick off. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our SOC Masterclass, brought to you by CyberProof. We're a world leader in MDR and managed XDR services. This is our fourth masterclass, and today we're really excited to be joined by people from across the globe, from North America, India, UK, Israel, Germany, Spain. It's great to have you with us. We hope you enjoy the sessions that we've put together today. I'm very excited to kick off our first session with two great guests. Tony Velleca is not so much a guest, but part of the DNA of CyberProof, being founder and CEO. And also a guest speaker, Allie Mellen, who's a Forrester Senior Analyst. So this first session, what it takes to build a world-class security operations center. We've got a lot of things to cover. So let me hand this over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard, for the introduction and trying to throw me off here a little bit. But thanks everybody for joining. So today we're going to talk a little bit about security operations and look at what's happening now that we're in a cloud era. We're seeing so many companies move from digital, which is forcing them to move assets into the cloud, which is changing, the security operations and architecture models that we have. We're doing all this against a backdrop of ever-changing threat landscape and the ongoing talent shortage that we have in our industry, and it's becoming a key challenge as we have this change. To stay ahead of the growing number of cyber attacks that we're seeing every day, how can enterprises develop and maintain the capabilities they need in order to protect their organizations from cyber attacks? In this session today, with Allie's help, we will touch on some of the essential aspects of running a security operations center in the cloud era, including how to overcome the skills gap, as well as the importance of XDR and more. So before we get started, let's do a quick health check on the state of security. We're gonna add a polling question out there so everybody can kind of jump in and give their point of view. Over to you, Howard.
Sure. So here's, can you see the first question?
Yep.
Yes.
So this question is, will your company or your clients what are your company's biggest security spend or expected spend in 2023? Cloud security, managed security services, new innovation, security software licenses, staffing, or training and awareness? Obviously, there's no one answer, but please share your insights with us and we can take a look at the responses in a few moments.
The suspense is killing me.
Yeah, it's like, please put your answer any questions. Let's see, we're getting almost to 50%. So let's push it over half the audience who's with us. Please give us your opinion on the largest security spend you expect your company or maybe your client's company in 2023. Okay. All right. Let's we're just pushing over 50%. So I'm going to stop the poll now, and let's share the results. And maybe Tony, Allie, what do you think?
I'm a little surprised. To be honest, I'm surprised staffing isn't higher up on there, but it is really interesting to see that the biggest security spend is pretty predominantly cloud security from those who are attending today. Tony, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I definitely think I was expecting to see cloud security being a key spend. I'm kind of glad from my perspective to see managed security services, but I definitely thought the staffing and training, maybe it's training and awareness and staffing kind of go together, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would just I'll add my good use of data for anyone who knows people that do polling all the time. this is somewhat of a self-selecting group. This event has been very much pitched to an audience that's interested in cloud and cloud security and cloud migration. So, the almost 50% of participants are saying cloud security is top of mind. That's good because it means we've reached the right section of people. Back to you, Tony.
Well, good. Well, why don't we jump right into the questions, unless you have another poll, Howard. I think we have a few more coming, right? Okay,
yep,
great.
Mm-hmm.
So really the first, just to kind of set the context, I'll leave this question for you, but what's needed in this modern SOC era as we look at cloud? What's changing? And I know you're doing a lot of research on this. Can you kind of give us an overview of what's happening now?
Absolutely. So there are two sides of the coin here, right? On the one hand, a lot of security teams and SOCs are moving their security tools into the cloud. And so that's a big shift that requires a lot of trust, particularly in your vendor and shared responsibility. That has been really beneficial for a lot of security teams because of the scalability that you can get in the cloud, the lack of maintenance, having kind of the ability to offset that onto your vendor and not have to worry about that anymore and kind of focus more on the security aspects, which are really what you're there for and what you've been hired for. And that's kind of happening pretty far behind, I'd say, how the rest of the business is adopting the cloud. We've seen the rest of the business really embrace the cloud over the last 5 years. And it hasn't been until fairly recently that security teams have started to catch up and do that as well. And honestly, the cloud brings a lot of challenges for security teams because on the one hand, we see a lot of tools coming into play that are specifically for more of that structural awareness and focused more on making sure that the cloud is secure, making sure that there are no misconfigurations, that there are no vulnerabilities, that things are configured correctly, that area of things. But then there's this whole other side, which is where we see most of the interest come from the SOC, which is, okay, how do we actually do detection? How are we actually going to find attackers that are looking to make use of SaaS applications or are lingering on our infrastructure in the cloud? Much more difficult problem than what we've seen classically on premise. Again, no more perimeter anymore. And there is a level of shared responsibility that can make it a bit challenging and very much so a different problem than what we saw on premise. And so I actually see a lot of security teams turn into their MDR provider, their managed services provider to try and support them in, okay, how are we going to do detection engineering for the cloud? What logs do we need to be bringing in? How do we need to be thinking about this? Some organizations are still very much so relying on that protection prevention aspect, but I think especially over the next 2 years, we're going to see a huge uptick in security operations centers that are focusing on this problem and that are trying to do it both in-house and through a MDR provider or managed service provider.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When we shift a lot of our assets from the data centers to the cloud, the cloud provider, the infrastructure is managed by the cloud provider, right? So it's a lot of the things that the classical security team was doing before, configuring firewalls and a lot of this being hardware is now software in the cloud, and it's really provided by the cloud provider. So we're seeing, from my purview, we're seeing a little more focus on application security, particularly for large organizations that have custom applications, right? And where we're entering vulnerabilities. And I think that you have done some studies also to show some statistics on, more hacks are now happening through the application layer. So kind of what's your point of view of what's happening there with application security and what's driving that in the cloud? So
absolutely. So this is an area that's really near and dear to my heart. First off, I think it's super interesting. Second, I come from a background of development and computer engineering. And so I am very familiar with a lot of the challenges that developers face and how that interface is with the security team. And in addition, I did some research recently with two of my colleagues, Sandy Carielli, who covers application security, and Jeff Pollard, who covers managed security services, on this specific thing. So the culmination of that research was understanding and really questioning, okay, so you have all of these homegrown applications in your enterprise. How are you protecting them? How do you know what's happening on them? How do you know what's happening on them is actually good behavior versus malicious behavior? Because it's actually quite a challenging problem, because every application acts differently, and you do not have the staff or the time to understand, threat model, identify what would be a deviation from the norm, and then build rules in your SIM or wherever to make that determination. And so it's a very interesting problem. And really the outcome of that research was you got to pick what's most important. And it becomes a conversation about risk tolerance. Is your risk tolerance high enough where it only has to be the top 5 applications that are using the most customer data? Do you need to be limiting the scope of what applications you're creating or how they're being created? Do you need to provide some boundaries for application security teams to say, okay, if you develop applications in this particular way, we don't need as much security controls around them. But if you do something custom, we're going to have a bigger conversation. And then once you understand that prioritization, it's all about talking to the people that are in the development roles, that are in the application security roles, thoroughly understanding and taking interest in what the application is doing so that you can identify how you can better protect it. It's very much so a different mind shift. And Sandy Carielli talks about this quite frequently, to creating security champions in the organization. And how can we let people know that we are technologists as well, and we really like technology, and we really want them to succeed in what they're doing. We just need to be helping enable it, instead of saying, oh no, you got to shut that application down because it's not doing things the way that we want them to be done for security purposes. So very complicated, very difficult, and a lot of diplomacy required, but also really cutting edge and interesting, and a great way to start enabling the business in new ways.
The other thing that I find strikingly interesting, obviously application DevSecOps and application security are key, and we're seeing the trend as people move to the cloud, but even security engineering itself is looking more like code, as we see the newer SIEMs like Sentinel and Google Chronicle and things go out there. They're using native cloud capabilities. And what I'm finding is our teams need to know how to write, detection rules. Everything is code, right? So where before we were configuring products, now we're actually writing code for everything, automations, etc. So it's driving a massive change in types of skills that we need in security engineering itself. Are you seeing that across the board? Can you comment a little bit about, we already had a skills shortage as it is. What are you seeing in terms of the people and talent needs as we move into the cloud? How's that changing?
It's a great question. So I'm definitely seeing what you're seeing as well, especially with some of the larger enterprises that I talk to. I have a bias towards this, again, because I used to write code all the time, but there's a lot more modularity and flexibility that you can get when you are basing rules, playbooks, etc. on code. And so one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of the more technical and more advanced teams are doing this and are very comfortable here and are able to basically create a little tiny development shop within their SOC where they're actually developing new rules. They're doing unit testing. They're testing again with a red team, and they have a really powerful cycle that they have built into their detection engineering process to ensure that new rules are high efficacy and that they don't cause any issues for the SOC as they do their daily work. So it's been very interesting to see that shift. I think for the majority of organizations, especially as we go down market, it's a lot more challenging. It's just finding people with that skill set is very hard. And then getting them to want to go into security is very hard. And so you end up with this challenge where, especially one of the things that I've seen over the past several years is new people enter the field. They're really excited about it. They spend a few years here. They burn out because it's exhausting and you have to work way more than 9 to 5. And there's really no work-life balance. And then they realize, hey, I've got the coding skills to just go into some other area of tech where I'll be paid better and where I'll have better hours and better overall benefits. And so they just end up leaving the industry. And so that's the biggest thing that I think we have to worry about as we move towards more, okay, let's get some of these more technical coding skills into the SOC, is how do we retain these people and make sure that they see a career path for themselves within the security industry.
You would think the comp was pretty good in the industry and the security side. All I'm seeing is salaries go up very quickly. But,
well, so this is the interesting thing too, right? Is that I'm sure for you guys, you are seeing that quite a bit because you are a security vendor, and security vendors are able to pay a lot better and offer better compensation and better hours, but internal security teams, not so much. The budget is much more limited, especially as you get to some of these smaller organizations or less mature organizations. And so ultimately, there's a lot of the talent that if it isn't being taken away from the security industry and moved back into other areas of tech, it's being sucked up by the vendors and leaving enterprises with less availability of talent or the inability to compete with the security vendors and what they're able to offer really high quality security talent.
yeah, true. We're seeing that with the government, FBI, NSA, and all these guys have been raided for years, right? They can't pay the same
Absolutely.
salary. So the other, I was just at your session, what was it, Austin, and so I saw Jeff, and he presented a interesting study. He said the kind of queries that Forrester, you and Jeff got last year about vendors changed dramatically from last year to this year. I don't know who was last year, but he said now at the top of the list, I'm seeing Google and Microsoft and these vendors, which were not in last year's Google. Last year's list. Can you comment a little bit about, I mean, to me, it was a strikingly sudden shift. It sounded like, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of trends around cloud native and tools and when it comes to security operations?
Absolutely. So this was at Forrester's Technology and Innovation Summit, which was in Austin a couple of weeks ago. I'm glad you were able to make it. And one of the interesting things that Jeff and I have been seeing, and honestly, the entire Forrester's entire security and risk team has been seeing, is a lot of these big players really pushing to either get more into security or to really overtake the market. Microsoft has been doing this for a number of years. Google had kind of dipped their toes in, especially in the security operations side with Chronicle, but they hadn't really done a lot to make additional improvements to the product over the past few years until earlier this year when they just went crazy with the acquisitions, acquired Simplify, acquired Mandiant, and now have released a whole new portfolio of security operations technologies and services. And ultimately, it's a very interesting shift that we're seeing here, because one of the biggest challenges in security is the fact that there's so much data and that it's so expensive to keep, to store, and then to do any type of analysis of that data. And these providers who own the infrastructure, like Google, like Microsoft, like Amazon, are the ones who actually have an opportunity to provide that infrastructure for security use cases at a much lower cost than others can, just because of the sheer size of deployments that they support, the sheer size of their customer base. And so it's caused a lot of interest in this space in particular, both from the standpoint of them entering as vendors, and then also from clients asking, like, what is this vendor doing in this space? Is this something I should be watching out for? What is their unique value proposition? And a lot of that comes back to the interoperability that they provide between, in Google's case, GCP and Chronicle, or Microsoft's case, Sentinel and Azure.
Yeah, and that's so you touched on a second. The cloud native has a basic infrastructure for handling large sets of data, but it also has some other things like AI tools built into them. And are you seeing people starting to use those natively, or still buying off the shelf products to do that?
So it's interesting. I see a lot of clients that will dabble in build like home growing a security solution, and a lot have done it outright on Splunk, for example. But really, it's a ton of work. It's a ton of work to build the capabilities that that vendors have built for security, like things like UBA, and even the ability to like SOAR, for example. Home growing a SOAR is, it's kind of a pain. It's a lot to maintain. It comes back to this maintenance question, right? Even if it's in the cloud, you still, if you're going to home grow any of this, you have to do a lot of maintenance, and you end up focusing on a lot more than just the security use cases. You end up focusing on the maintenance use cases, the operational use cases. And so I've seen some try to go down this route, but it's usually very challenging and requires a lot of staff to implement and then to maintain in the long term. And so they kind of start to move away from that inevitably. Now, when there are tools that enable them a little bit better to do this, that kind of give a security flavor, but don't necessarily give them all the capabilities that they are looking for, and they can build on top of that, that's where I see a lot more clients and security teams having success.
Got it. That's good. So I think, Howard, you got another poll for us, right? Kind of shift topics here.
Yeah, so actually what we wanted to do is segue into more of the XDR space. If I may, Ali, perhaps you could give us kind of like a definition, or your feeling of what actually is XDR. It's this a term that's being used more and more. Is it as a buzzword? What stands behind it? And then we can get into some of the details, and then I'll run a quick poll.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Definitely a big buzzword. Get a lot of questions about this. In fact, when I first joined Forrester a little over a year and a half ago now, my first task was, hey, what is this XDR thing, and should Forrester care about it? And that was my main task for the first year that I was at Forrester. And so I spent a lot of time writing Forrester's first report on XDR, doing the first new tech on XDR providers, which is like a market landscape, and then also doing the new wave on XDR providers. And the findings from that research, and from continued research that I've done over the latest year as well, is that XDR is the evolution of endpoint detection and response technologies. It is bringing additional telemetry to EDR in order to provide better investigations and provide better response capabilities, more complete response capabilities. There's a number of different vendors who are delivering this as a product today, but honestly, the vast majority have been delivering this as a service for a while through MDR, because at the end of the day, services you can accomplish a lot more, a lot faster with services than you can with product, because ultimately products take iteration cycles, they take development cycles, and it takes a lot longer to get a product to market than it does to just throw bodies at a problem. So MDR providers, since Jeff Pollard's 2020 MDR wave, have required extended capabilities beyond the endpoint, managing detection and response for endpoint, network, identity, et cetera. And so many of the products that are delivering XDR today took their cues from MDR early on and started to incorporate additional telemetry. And we're seeing that market at least reach some level of early maturity right now, although there's a ton of work to be done, especially for a lot of the EDR providers that are moving to XDR. MDR definitely has a more robust overall offering. It's just dependent on whether or not you want a service on the back end, or you just want the product capabilities of bringing all of these pieces together.
Absolutely. And we actually, our next session, we're going to go into a bit more detail around the 3- and 4-letter acronym soup that is warming up the market. But let's launch another poll question, and then we can discuss it a little bit. Okay, so maybe for those that have just heard about XDR, so Allie's definition is definitely a good one. Please, what is the most important outcome? A lot of the time in our discussions with customers, it's not about features and benefits, it's about outcomes. So what is people's feeling? Is it detection, investigation, response? Obviously it's all three, but which one is the really important one? So let's give people a few moments to respond. I'm just going up. Now, while we're waiting a few moments, Allie, was there a report that you were involved in that was kind of asking this kind of question? What do you think is how do you think people are going to respond to this? I'm now testing you on how it's going to come out. I can see the results, by the way.
Well, actually, so especially in the early research that I did on this, the most important piece was the quality of detections and the high fidelity detections that you were able to get. Mm-hmm. Despite that, I honestly think the investigation piece is probably the most important. I would love to say the response piece, but right now it's so early stage that the response capabilities aren't as robust as I would consider to be kind of a game changer for the industry. But the investigation piece, being able to bring in other telemetry for investigation and for better workflows for investigation is really, really powerful. And so I would highlight that. Admittedly, the research that I've done shows a huge focus from actual users on the detection piece, but I'm very curious to see the responses.
Sure. Okay, well, let's do that. I think you'll be interested by the results. Let's do that. So there we go. Wow. So 37% said detection, 15% investigation, and 49% response. So how would you explain? Remember, the question is the most important outcome, right? And I think to that point, this idea of investigating being or response being really, really important because but it's underdeveloped, let's say. But yeah, 49% saying that that's the most important outcome. What's your feeling about this?
Well, on the one hand, I'm surprised. On the other hand, I'm not. Response is probably one of the most difficult pieces in general for security teams. There's not a lot of, like, what do you have for response today, right? You have EDR or you have SOAR. And SOAR is useful, but also kind of a pain because you have to create playbooks so that you can actually do the response. A lot of the conversation that I have focuses on, well, which aspects of response can we automate? Which aspects can't we? There's a huge push and pull between that. And so I think it is likely top of mind and a pretty important question for security teams right now. But when they actually get into the product, they'll definitely see that most of the outcomes that you're able to achieve are going to be around detection and investigation. So it might also be a factor of the R just isn't really there yet, and maybe the promises of what the R can give are bigger than what they're actually able to deliver on today.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Tony? What's your take on this poll?
I'm glad I saw a response there, but I think both investigation and response, as Allie said, require, when you require like enrichment to be able to do before you can do automation, for example, on a response, and you can do where I'm hearing the word automation quite a bit. You have to have you have to do a really good job of enriching data and pulling additional context in. So I would have expected a little more on the investigation side as well, as they said. So
okay, so I'm gonna hide that poll. It's Tony, back to you.
Okay, so so we already covered the definition of XDR, but when we talked about it, we talked about it in terms of detection, investigation, and response. But the other aspect is, when MDR came about, it was primarily related to EDR, endpoint detection and response. Now we're moving to cloud. I'm kind of curious, Allie, what's your definition of an endpoint? I think I asked you this before, but we're seeing more and more of our customers. In fact, I was just at one of our airline customers here in Asia, and they said, I didn't realize we were doing this for them, but we're monitoring their airplanes. We're monitoring the traffic going back and forth to their airplanes, and this is we're looking for anomalies to see if somebody had somehow breached, they're doing something strange as they upload and download data as they land and take off. So how does this relate to the definition of XDR? Does it?
Tony, do not even get me started on the definition of endpoint. I will rant and rant. It is a really, really great question, because this is also another piece of the XDR and the EDR conversation. Ultimately, is what is an endpoint? Vendors, especially, I've seen, especially product vendors, have thought that an endpoint is a laptop or maybe sometimes a server, and that's about it. But in reality, to practitioners, an endpoint is the device that you're working off of. It's also whatever is at the other side of that conversation. It is the point that is being connected to by the network, by the internet. And so there's a lot of different types of endpoints. And one of the things that makes this so challenging is that they're all very different, and some of them are much easier to do detection and response on than others, and some are much more ubiquitous to the enterprise than others, which is why we end up with pretty much being stuck in the laptop or server mindset. So when it comes to what an endpoint is, I do think that there's validity to having a broader conversation about how that's going to change. One of the things with EDR that pushed EDR to XDR was the recognition by endpoint detection and response vendors that the endpoint is actually losing importance right now. The business data is not on this laptop. It's not on premise at all, really. And all of it is shifting to the cloud. And so how you protect that information becomes very different. One of the reasons EDR was so successful is because you were actually protecting information where it lives. Now it lives in the cloud. And so how do you do that? And how do you address that as an EDR vendor, especially when this endpoint, this laptop, is going to become much less important over the next 10 years. It could be anything at this point. It could be my mobile phone. It could be an iPad. It could be, sure, the laptop. And so ultimately, what this comes down to is, in order to address the fact that the data has moved, EDR had to reimagine how they think of an endpoint and reimagine what it means to protect the business data, in this case now in the cloud. So I completely agree that that scoping an endpoint down to what we classically think of as an endpoint because of technologies like EDR is far too limiting. And if anything, we're going to see that evolution continue, and our need to accept and to identify other types of endpoints become even more important.
I think it's interesting. I like to use the example of a self-driving car to our teams, and just to look at the future, to start challenging people's thinking. But the self-driving cars here, I just got myself download on the Tesla, right? And it's interesting. It's talking directly to the cloud, and the cloud is in real time giving it AI information, so it's processing in real time. So there's a lot of network connectivity happening while you're driving on these vehicles. So it's not a problem for the future. It's actually a problem for today. And like you said, these are hard problems to solve. You have to look at how we get there aren't standard patterns for getting that data in, or even looking at how we detect those future problems.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is that while it is a problem for today, this always to me becomes a question of, when is it an enterprise problem, right? Because we do have things like self-driving cars that are happening today to some level. They're not entirely self-driving despite the marketing, but those are important, but they're at a consumer level. And so it becomes a bit of a different conversation. It's like what we see with the privacy wars happening right now with the iPhone, right? It's the enterprise conversation is very different than what we're seeing with some of these IoT devices or smart devices, et cetera. And so once there becomes more of a concentration of capability with these products in an enterprise setting, that's when it's actually going to kind of cascade, and we'll see products designed to actually protect that. But we have to figure out when that tipping point is going to be. A lot of times we see that is just when the startups start trying to protect it. But especially if we start to see self-driving cars that will do things like drive truck routes, and if we can see self-driving cars that will handle truck routes more effectively, then we're going to really start to see some security requirements ramp up in those areas.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So I think there was some another article you did was very interesting, and I think it was saying why CISOs need to think about buying security services before they looked at security products, which I agree with, but I would love to get your take on why we're seeing that and what that point of view is about. So
definitely. So this actually came out of a lot of conversations with Jeff Pollard, who's really my counterpart for the services side of things. And ultimately what we were seeing was I was getting a lot of question about products, as I do, but inevitably I would ask during that conversation, are you thinking about getting a service or do you have a managed service? And they would say, we're going to get one, but we want to get the technology in place first. And that to me was the moment where I was like, okay, we need to back up here, because the product is obviously incredibly useful, huge advocate for products right here. But when you are dealing with a service provider and a product, your main point of contact, your main touch point, your main partner is that service provider. They're going to be the ones managing that product for you, especially when it comes to EDR or SIM, which are the two of the biggest areas that I cover. And so I always recommend that individual goes and talks to Jeff first about what service provider they should be using, because some service providers will be better at certain technologies than others, and they will also be able to meet your use case better than others for business reasons. And so it's very important to establish that trusted relationship with your service provider before you go looking to rip and replace the technology that you're currently using or go to consider a new technology. If not only just because of the constant touch points that you have with them, the customer support that you're going to be dealing with from them, the individuals that you're going to be working with on a regular basis, and then the technology underlying it comes in after that. And it is also a factor because of the ways that different service providers are able to handle certain technologies better. So that's something that I found was that a lot of people assume that you need to get all the technology in place, that you need to get everything right before you can bring in the service provider on top. But I actually think it's quite the opposite, and that establishing that partnership early on will help you achieve better outcomes in the long term.
Yeah, I think you said the right word at the end. It's outcomes. And I found two types of customers: the ones that care the technologists, or the ones that really just want us to focus on the outcomes. It's much easier for us if we don't have to support thousands of different types of devices, obviously, and we can be more cost effective as well. So Howard, I think you had another poll. Am I correct?
Yeah, actually, slightly out of order. I'd like to just jump back. One of the the real challenges when for service providers, but also for any organization, especially complex carrier grade companies, is actually the type of data sources and what is that mix and what are the most important ones. So this is actually a question around that. So yeah, so here it is. The question is, what are the most important data sources in your organization that should be fed into the XDR, MDR platform? So IoT, OT, network data, cloud workloads, email, security tools, identity data, standard endpoints. Let's see what people have to say there.
What do you think it's going to be, Howard?
I would say probably endpoints. But
Really? I don't know. Part of me feels like it's going to be cloud because as you started the conversation, focus for a lot here is on the cloud security element, or identity. I don't know.
okay.
Rolling the dice.
Rolling dice, yeah. Couple more moments. So if you're gonna give us your opinion, please share it now. We're almost at 50%. Almost there. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm gonna stop the poll now. We've just been over a minute, and here, let's share the results. See what you think. There you go.
Interesting.
You won the day.
Cloud.
I got one right?
Okay.
And
Any surprises in there? Obviously, this is somewhat of a professional audience. Obviously from different businesses, different challenges. But any thoughts there? Anything jump out? You see that the endpoints is obviously second largest category.
I was actually
think-
curious to see how many
yeah.
people we put OT, IoT. It's a little higher than I expected.
Same.
We're obviously seeing some customers in some industries do that, but that's more than I thought. So
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm surprised to see that one. To me, this almost reads like the question could have been, what is your biggest pain point? What do you need help with the most? And that's where like OT and IoT come in, because maybe you want XDR to solve that problem because you don't currently have a way to do that effectively, which would be very understandable. But yeah, the cloud workloads and identity in particular makes sense to me. I think the email security one is also really interesting because of that combination of EDR and email security tools is really powerful when you're looking at a full attack story. But yeah, cloud clearly top of mind.
Okay.
actually, on the now would have a little bit of a curveball here, but when we talk about cloud workloads, what I've seen is we talked about application security, but I'm also seeing what's cloud posture management, right? And it's not necessarily triaging events, it's actually looking at the controls and when something gets configured outside the control framework. So is that the responsibility of the SOC, or is it becoming the responsibility of the SOC in a new world?
God, I hope not. One of the things that I've been trying to push is let's get things that are on that structural awareness side out of the SOC. So no firewall management, no configuration management, no vulnerability management. Let's focus on the actual detection and response of attackers in real time. I think there's a lot of confusion about this because we kind of throw around the word detection for a lot of different things. A lot of people say, oh, you detect vulnerabilities. And it's like, that is not the same thing as what the SOC is doing, is detecting actual attackers. But I do think that some of the context that you can get from things like misconfigurations or vulnerabilities can be really helpful during triage, during investigation. So there's a place for it. It's just not the core focus. It is a supporting role for the SOC. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. So we're seeing it's blurry because yes, you're detecting maybe that a configuration change and it's wrong, but I think you're going to see auto patching happen, and it's actually happening right now. I remember Jamil from Equifax showing how everything's in real time now. He's got everything. He held up his phone and said, I know exactly what's happening in every cloud. And as soon as I have a misconfiguration, it automatically patches. But he said, now I have a problem with my third parties because I want them all running on my cloud so I can get the same information. But yeah, I think that'll be handled a different way. So like you said. Howard,
Okay.
is there another poll, or is that
No, that's it. Actually, I did get a question in for Allie.
yeah.
So I know that you have also done some research on this, and we'd just like you to share, what have been the top security priorities for CISOs you speak to, like looking ahead, looking to 2023. What's top of mind from the Forrester worldview or from the Allie worldview?
No, it is all the Forrester worldview, believe me. So with regards to some of the top priorities that I'm seeing from CISOs, a lot of it comes back to the cloud. And a lot of it comes back to securing the cloud, making sure that that the business can make better use of the cloud without security getting in the way. In addition, there's kind of a shift with some of these priorities. If you think about, like we did a survey on this, we do a survey every year of security leaders and security decision makers, thousands of them, trying to better understand what their goals are. And one of the things that kept coming up was contribute to business operational excellence, which I think is actually really powerful. That's really more focused on the really tactical priorities related to privacy and related to considerations around that. But it speaks to the shift that my colleagues have been seeing in the role, which is more CISOs reporting directly into the CEO as opposed to into the CIO, more of a focus on some of the business priorities. Now, when it comes to the challenges, and I bring this up because I find it really, really interesting, for the past 3 years, the security team has faced the same top two challenges. They have not changed. It's the top two for 3 years. And that is the changing and evolving nature of IT threats and the complexity of the IT environment. And this is really disturbing to me because it's not changing. Like we have XDR, we have all of these new technologies, we have a more broader focus on ZT, but nothing's changing. And I think it's one of the things that led to XDR is we need help. Security teams need help with the changing and evolving nature of IT threats, and they need to be doing things internally to reduce the complexity of the IT environment, or at least to manage it a little bit more effectively. And so any way that we can resolve those two things, or at least get them, maybe we can have something else beat out those two for the top challenges, would be very, very beneficial. And I think it's something that we're going to see continue on to the new year and be a big focus of a lot of the research that I do in the future.
Great. Okay. So we got
questions
another
from the
question.
audience? Okay,
Tony,
good.
yeah. We got.
If you don't have one, I have a trick question, but I'm going to hold it off till the end. So go ahead.
All right. Ayush, I hope I got your name right. Thank you for submitting a question. So here it is. How is the SOC adapting to the challenges thrown by rapid cloud adoption by businesses? How much time have you got, Allie?
Yeah, seriously. There's a couple of layers here. I think the broader security team is handling it by focusing on making sure that that we're using the cloud correctly and that there aren't misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, things like that, that are causing challenges for the security team broadly, but also the SOC, because though the SOC doesn't have direct control over these, isn't responsible for them, definitely is responsible for the outcome when they cause a breach. So it becomes very important from that perspective. Now, with regards to how the SOC is handling the rapid shift to the cloud, it's multifaceted, right? There's a lot of work being done, bringing in cloud logs to like AWS logs, things like that, CloudTrail, to try and get a better understanding of what's happening and what normal behavior looks like. There's also a big focus on identity and on bringing in whatever information you can with regards to logs from SaaS applications, because a big part of this challenge too is that there's multiple layers to the cloud, right? It's not just one type of thing. It's not just SaaS applications. It's also, you have to worry about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. How do you defend that in a very different way than you think of with SaaS applications? And so ultimately, a lot of it is let's control what we can. Some of the SaaS applications make that a lot easier because they do prioritize providing certain security logs. But then with some of these other applications in the cloud, then it gets into a much more complicated thing of we have to take this piecemeal and look at how the cloud is being used, look at what applications are being run in the cloud, and how we can identify risky or bad behavior that isn't necessarily fraud, but is an actual attacker. And so the answer is honestly, to bring it back to the Navy SEALs, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's what's happening right now, is this slow move combined with support from things like MDR providers who can kind of iterate a little bit more quickly and have some of the cloud experts in-house to be able to focus on that as well.
Nice. Tony, what's your view on this?
I'll agree. I'm focusing on my trick question. We only have 8 minutes. So.
You're grinning too much. It's worrying me.
Now, this came from the last Forrester thing. I thought it was very interesting because they had an alternate point of view on the metaverse, and so I thought it was fun. But my question to you is: should we start focusing on securing the metaverse? Should our IT teams worried about that?
I actually have a webinar coming up on this with one of the people from that, because it's such an interesting topic, and we do have a group of us at Forrester that focus on securing emerging technologies and when do you actually need to care about it and why. And we also have a group of analysts who are in different areas, right? Not just security and risk, who cover things like the metaverse and actually spend all their time thinking about this. And they tell me that the metaverse isn't going to be real for another 8 to 10 years. So I would say we should not think about securing the metaverse, or it should not be a major concern for everyone right now. It should be a concern for those who are building out instances of the metaverse. And they need to be thinking about security and particularly privacy right now. Enza Yiannopoulos is a privacy analyst at Forrester on the security and risk team, and she's giving a talk on this at Security and Risk Forum on the privacy implications of the metaverse. And it's fascinating stuff, because we really need to get this right if we're going to protect, honestly, protect everyone, but also protect some of our younger users who may not fully understand what they're getting into when they join the metaverse and think it's a cool, exciting new thing.
Yeah, I'll get buying my piece of property out there soon, but
So we just have a couple more minutes to go, and actually another question came in. I'm gonna give this one to you, Tony, since you're constantly worrying about shortages of analysts and high quality professionals. So this question: what are your thoughts? What do you want to kind of share with people who are on this masterclass for the first time and are new to the security operations scene?
What do I want to share with people? I actually
What would be a word of advice or words of wisdom?
I actually think, and to Ali's point earlier, I think it's a great career opportunity for people that are interested in this. I think the security problem in general is going to grow exponentially. We got everything being connected. We have massive amounts of data. We have, more incentives to and more economic incentives probably to hack things. So it's going to be, the need is going to be there. We're going to have to drive automation. And I think the skill set's going to change. But for people getting into it, we also found ourselves that, understanding security, taking a network person, training them on security is harder than taking a person through our standard security operations, and then specializing them in threat intelligence or networks and other things. So honestly, getting that experience and going through that, I think, is a great career move for anybody. So
okay, Allie, any final thoughts generally or related to that question?
Yeah, I think for the person who asked, welcome, congrats, and also protect your time. I've talked to a lot of analysts who are new to the SOC, and overwhelmingly, I did a lot of research on this actually. Overwhelmingly, the constant feedback was, this is not a 9-to-5 job. You're going to work extra hours and it can be exhausting. So I'd say prepare for that, and also protect your time and set boundaries for what you are willing to accept for work. And then start thinking about where you want to go after a SOC analyst and start building your skills in that area. It can sometimes feel like it's a job that you kind of do every day and don't have time for anything else. But building up your skills in adjacent area, if you want to be a threat hunter, if you want to be an incident responder, etc., is really important to get to that next level.
Thank you so much. And thank you also, Tony. It's been a great session. It went, I don't know about you, it went pretty quickly, and it was super interesting. We really appreciate the time. Thank you for the questions that came in. And we're actually going to take a 3-minute break. And then we're going to be kicking off the next session, which is demystifying security provider acronyms beyond the hype. And so this is actually kind of digging in a little bit more detail with a couple of our directors in CyberProof. So please, if you're with us, stay with us. Maybe take a quick coffee break if that's what you like drinking. And we look forward to starting up in a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, Tony and Ali, thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much for
Howard.
having me.
Thanks, Howard. Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Hey,
Okay, bye.
bye for now.